Good morrow, scholars. Welcome again to Star Wars: Heir to the Empire. I was going to say Age of Ultron. I don't know why. Although, my buddy Adam and I were just talking about it last night, so that might have something to do with it. Anywho, sorry for a late upload, and the second one later. I'm going to splice together some of the funny bits. Wait, that came out wrong. Of Ryan and I playing Dying Light the other day. We are in Chapter 16, page 177. There was no dreaming in the Jedi hibernation trance, almost in state. No dreaming, no consciousness, virtually no awareness of the outside world. It was very much like a coma. In fact, except for one interesting anomaly, despite the absence of true consciousness, Luke's time sense still somehow managed to function. He didn't understand it exactly, but it was something he learned to recognize and use. It was that time sense, coupled with R2's frantic gurgling in the foggy distance, that was his first hint something was wrong. "All right, R2, I'm awake," he reassured the droid as he worked his way back toward consciousness. Blinking the gummy feeling out of his eyes, he gave the instruments a quick scan. You would think a hibernation trance that the Jedi have wouldn't be like waking up. I don't know. I guess it makes sense. They'd be in a much more deep state of resting than normal humans or just normal people. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts, I suppose. Why do I do that? Let's see. Where was I? The readings confirmed that his time sense had already told him. There we go. The X-Wing had come out of hyperspace nearly 20 light years short of Jamark. The proximity indicator registered 2 ships practically on top of him ahead, with a third off to one side in the distance. Still blinking, he raised his head for a look, and with a rush of adrenaline, came fully awake. Directly ahead of him was what looked like a light freighter, a blazing overload in its engine section, visible through crumbled and half-vaporized hull plates. Beyond it, looming like a dark cliff face, was an Imperial Star Destroyer. Let's see. Should I try and do an impression, or just use... Never mind, I don't know. Anger, fear, aggression. The dark side of the Force, are they? Sorry. I wasn't ready. With an effort, Luke forced down his fear. The freighter was between him and the Star Destroyer, concentrating on their larger prey. The Imperials might not even have noticed his arrival. "Let's get out of here, R2, he said, keying the controls back to manual and swinging the X-Wing hard around. The etheric rudder whined in protest with the turn. "Unidentified starfighter," a harsh voice boomed from the speaker. "This is the Imperial Star Destroyer Chimera. Transmit your identification code and state your business." So much for hoping he wouldn't be noticed. In the distance now, Luke could see what it was that had yanked the X-Wing out of hyperspace. The third ship was an interdictor, I still don't know, cruiser. The Imperials' favorite tool for keeping opponents from jumping to light speed. Obviously, they'd been lying in wait for the freighter. It was just his bad luck he'd run across the interdictor projected mass shadow, and been kicked out of hyperspace along with it. Wink, wink. The freighter. Closing his eyes briefly with concentration, Luke reached out with the Force, trying to discover whether it was a Republic ship, a neutral, or even a pirate ship that the Chimera had caught. But there was no hint of any life aboard. Either the crew had escaped, or else they had already been taken prisoner. Either way, there was nothing Luke could do for them now. "R2, find me the nearest edge of what the interdictor's gravity wave cone." What? Oh, okay, I gotcha. He ordered, throwing the X-Wing into a stomach-churning downward drop that even the acceleration compensator couldn't quite handle. If he could keep the freighter directly between him and the Star Destroyer, he might be able to get out of range before they could bring a tractor beam to bear. "Unidentified fighter," the harsh voice was starting to get angry. "I repeat, transmit your identification code or prepare to be detained." "Should have brought one of Han's false ID codes with me," Luke muttered to himself. "R2, where's that edge estimate?" The droid beeped, and the diagram appeared on the computer scope. "That far, huh?" Luke murmured. "No." Where was I? Well, nothing to do but go for it. Hang on. Unidentified starfighter. The rest of the harangue was drowned out by the roar of the drive as Luke abruptly kicked the ship into full power. Almost lost in the noise was R2's questioning trilling. "No, I want the deflector shields down," Luke shouted back. "We need the extra speed." He didn't add that if the Star Destroyer was really serious about vaporizing them, the presence or absence of shields wouldn't matter much at this range anyway. But R2 probably already knew that. But if the Imperials didn't seem interested in vaporizing him out of hand, neither were they willing to just let him go. On the rear scope, he could see the Star Destroyer moving up and over the damaged freighter, trying to get clear of its interference. Luke threw a quick look at the proximity indicator. He was still within tractor beam range, and at their current relative speeds would remain so for the next couple of minutes. What he needed was some way to distract or blind them. "R2, I need a fast programming on one of the proton torpedoes," he called. "I want to drop it at 0 Delta 5, or V, I don't know. Then have it turn around and head straight aft. No sensors or homing codes either. I want it to go out cold. Can you do that?" There was an affirmative beep. "Good. As soon as it's ready, give me a warning and then let it go." He turned his attention back to the rear scope, gave the X-Wing's course a slight readjustment, and with its guided sensors in their normal active state, the torpedo would be subject to the Star Destroyer's impressive array of jamming equipment. Going up cold like this would limit the Imperials' response to trying to shoot it down with their laser fire. The flip side of that, of course, was that if it wasn't aimed very accurately, it would shoot right past its intended target without even a twitch. R2 beeped, and within a slight lurch, the torpedo was away. Luke watched it go, reaching out with the force to give it a slight realignment tap. And a second later, a spectacular multiple flash of sympathetic detonations, the freighter blew up. Nice! I'd love to see that in a movie. Luke looked at the proximity indicator, mentally crossing his fingers, almost out of range now. If the debris from the freighter could screen off the tractor beam for a few more seconds, they should make it. R2 warbled a warning. Luke glanced at the translation, then at the long-range scope, and felt his stomach tighten. Let's see, where was I? R2 wobbled again, more insistent this time. "I see it, R2, Luke growled. It was, of course, the obvious tactic for the Imperials to employ. With the freighter no longer of any interest whatsoever in the indicator... Never mind. Was changing position, swinging around, trying to bring its huge gravity field projectors more fully to bear on the escaping X-Wing. Luke watched as the cone-shaped field area angled across the scope. "Hang on, R2, he called, and again, too abruptly for the compensators to totally negate, he swung the X-Wing into a right-angle turn, blasting laterally to their original course. From behind him came a shocked screech. "Quiet, R2, I know what I'm doing." "Oh dear," he told the droid. Off to starboard, yeah. Bow. What? Starboard now. There we go." This Star Destroyer was belatedly trying to shift its massive bulk, pivoting to track Luke's maneuver, and for the first time since the beginning of the encounter, flashes of laser fire began lancing out. Luke made a quick decision. Speed alone wasn't going to save him now, and a near miss could end the contest right here and now. "Deflectors up, R2, he said. He instructed the droid, giving his full attention to his best evasive maneuvering. "Give me a balance between shield and power." Wait, what? Or shield, power, and speed. There we go. R2 beeped a response, and there was a slight drop in engine noise as the shields began drawing power. They were going slower, but so far the gamble seemed to be working. Caught off balance by Luke's right-angle maneuver, the interdictor was now rotating in the wrong direction, its gravity beam sweeping across Luke's previous course instead of tracking the current one. Its commander was obviously trying to correct that mistake, but the sheer inertia of the ship's massive gravity generators was on Luke's side. If he could stay out of the Star Destroyer's range for another few seconds, he'd be out of the beam and free to escape into hyperspace. "Stand by for light speed," he told R2. "Don't worry about direction. We can do a short hop and set things up more carefully once we're clear." Let's see. Where was I? Okay, yeah. R2 acknowledged, and without warning, Luke was slammed hard against his harness. The Star Destroyer's tractor beam had them. R2 shrilled in dismay, but Luke had no time to comfort the droid now. His straight-line course had suddenly become an arc, a sort of pseudo-orbit with the Star Destroyer playing the role of the planet at its center. Unlike a true orbit, though, this one wasn't stable, and as soon as the Imperials got another beam focus on him, the circle would quickly deteriorate into a tight inward spiral, a spiral whose endpoint would be inside the Star Destroyer's hangar bay. He dropped the shields, throwing full power once again to the drive, knowing full well it was most likely a futile gesture. And he was right. For a second the beam seemed to falter, but it quickly caught back up with him. Such a relatively minor change in speed was too small to foul up the beam's tracking equipment, but if he could find a way to arrange a more major change in speed... Unidentified starfighter, the harsh voice was back, unmistakably gloating this time. You have no chance of escape. Further efforts will merely damage your vehicle. You are ordered to power down and prepare to dock. Luke clenched his teeth. This was going to be dangerous, but he'd run out of choices, and he had heard stories of this working at least once before, somewhere. R2, we're going to try something tricky, he called to the droid. On my signal, I want you to reverse trigger the acceleration compensator, full power, and bypass the cutoffs if you have to. Something warbled from the control panel, and he risked a quick look at the scope. His curving arc had brought him right into the edge of the interdictor's gravity projection. R2, now! And with a scream of horribly stressed electronics, the X-Wing came to a sudden dead stop. There wasn't even enough time for Luke to wonder what aboard his ship could have possibly made a scream like that before he was again thrown, even harder this time, against his harness. His thumbs ready on the firing buttons, jabbed down hard, setting a pair of proton torpedoes lancing forward. Simultaneously, he pulled the X-Wing upward. The Star Destroyer's tractor beam, tracking him along his path, had momentarily gotten lost by his sudden maneuver. If the computers guiding that lock would now be considerate enough to latch onto the proton torpedoes instead of him... And suddenly the torpedoes were gone, leaving behind only a wisp of their exhaust trail to show that they'd been snatched off their original course. The gamble had succeeded. The Star Destroyer was now steadily pulling in the wrong target. We're free, he snapped to R2, throwing full power to the drive. Get ready for light speed. The droid trilled something, but Luke had no time to look down at the computer scope for the translation. Realizing their error and recognizing there was insufficient time to reestablish a tractor lock, the Imperials had apparently decided to go for a straight kill. All the Star Destroyer's batteries seemed to open up at once, and Luke suddenly found himself trying to dodge a virtual sandstorm of laser fire. Ew. Forcing himself to relax, he let the force flow through him, allowing it to guide his hands on the controls the way it did his lightsaber. The ship jumped once as a shot got through. His peripheral vision saw the tip of his dorsal starboard laser cannon flash and disappear into a cloud of superheated plasma. A near mist burned past overhead. Another closer scorched a line across the transparisteel canopy. Oh, okay. Another warble came from the scope. They were clear of the interdictor's gravity shadow. Go! Luke shouted to R2. And with a second, even more nerve-wrenching electronic scream from behind him, the sky ahead abruptly turned into star lines. They'd made it. Yay! For what seemed like a small eternity, Thrawn gazed at the viewport, staring at the spot where Skywalker's X-Wing had been when it had vanished. Surreptitiously, I can pronounce some of the most odd words I've ever seen, but I will stumble on cow. Where was I? Pelion watched him, wondering tautly when the inevitable explosion would come. With half an ear, he listened for the damage control reports coming from the number 4 tractor beam projector, carefully not getting himself involved with the cleanup. The destruction of one of the Chimera's 10 projectors was a relatively minor loss. Skywalker's escape was not. Thrawn stirred and turned around. Pelion tensed. Come with me, Captain, the Grand Admiral said quietly, striding away down the bridge command walkway. Yes, sir. Pelion murmured, falling into step behind him. The stories of how Darth Vader had dealt with subordinates' failures running through his mind. The bridge was uncommonly quiet as Thrawn led the way to the aft stairway and descended into the starboard crew pit. He walked past the crewers at their consoles, past the officers standing painfully erect behind them, and came to a halt at the control station for the starboard tractor beams. "Your name," he said, his voice excruciatingly calm. "Chris Peterson, I guess." The young man seated at the console answered, his eyes wary. "You were in charge of the tractor beam during our engagement with the starfighter. It was a statement, not a question." "Yes, sir, but what happened wasn't my fault." Thrawn's eyebrows arched just a bit. "Explain." Peterson started to gesture to his side, changed his mind in mid-motion. The target did something with his acceleration compensator that killed his velocity vector. "I'm aware of the facts," Thrawn cut in. "I'm waiting to hear why his escape wasn't your fault." "I was never properly trained for such an occurrence, sir," Peterson said, a flicker of defiance touching his eyes. "The computer lost the lock, but seemed to pick it up again right away. There was no way for me to know it had really picked up something else until the proton torpedoes detonated against the projector." Peterson held his gaze evenly. "Yes, sir." For a long moment, Thrawn studied him. "Who was your officer?" he asked at last. Peterson's eyes shifted to the right. "Ensign Colclasure, sir." "Sorry." Slowly, deliberately, Thrawn turned to the tall man standing rigidly at attention with his back to the walkway. "You are in charge of this man?" Colclasure swallowed visibly. "Yes, sir," he said. "Was his training also your responsibility?" "Yes, sir," Colclasure said again. "Did you, during that training, run through any scenario similar to what just happened?" "I don't remember, sir," the ensign admitted. "The standard training package does include scenarios concerning loss of lock and subsequent re-establishment confirmation." That's interesting. Thrawn threw a brief glance back down at Peterson. "Did you recruit him as well, Ensign?" "No, sir. He was a conscript." "Does that make him less worthy of your training time than a normal enlistee?" "No, sir." Colclasure's eyes flicked to Peterson. "I've always tried to treat my subordinates equally." "I see." Thrawn considered a moment, then half turned to look past Pelion's shoulder. "Rook?" Pelion started as Rook brushed silently past him. He hadn't realized that Hungry had followed them down. Thrawn waited until Rook was standing at his side, then turned back to Colclasure. "Do you know the difference between an error and a mistake, Ensign?" The entire bridge had gone deathly still. Colclasure swallowed again. His face started to go pale. "No, sir." "Anyone can make an error, Ensign, but that error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it." He raised a finger and almost lazily pointed. Pelion never even saw Rook move. Peterson certainly never had time to scream. "What, Peterson?" "That's what I said, right?" From farther down the crew pit came the sound of someone trying valiantly not to be sick. Thrawn glanced over Pelion's shoulder again and gestured, and that silence was further broken by the sound of a pair of stormtroopers coming forward. "Dispose of it," the Grand Admiral ordered them, turning away from Peterson's crumpled body and pinning Colclasure with a stare. "The error, Ensign," he told the other softly, "has now been corrected. You may begin training a replacement." He held Colclasure's eyes another heartbeat, then, seemingly oblivious to the tension around him, he turned back to Pelion. "I want a full tactical readout in the last few seconds of that encounter, Captain," he said, all calm and business again. "I'm particularly interested in his lightspeed vector." "I have it all here, sir," the lieutenant spoke up, a bit hesitantly, stepping forward to offer the Grand Admiral a datapad. "Thank you." Thrawn glanced at it briefly, handed it to Pelion. "We'll have him, Captain," he said, starting back down the crew pit toward the stairway. "Very soon now, we'll have him." "Yes, sir," Pelion agreed, cautiously hurrying to catch up with the other. "I'm sure it's just a matter of time." Thrawn raised an eyebrow. "You misunderstand me," he said mildly. "I mean that literally." He's out there right now, not very far away, and he smiled slyly at Pelion. He's helpless. Pelion frowned. I don't understand, sir. That maneuver he used was an interesting side effect I suspected he didn't know, or has an interesting side effect he didn't know about. I suspect. I don't know. The Grand Admiral explained. Backfiring an acceleration compensator like that does severe damage to the adjoining hyperdrive. A light year away, no farther, and it will fail completely. All we have to do is make a search along that vector or persuade others to do our searching for us, and he'll be ours. Do you follow? Yes, sir, Pelion said. Shall I contact the rest of the fleet? Thrawn shook his head. Preparing for the Sluice Von attack is the fleet's top priority at the moment. No, I think we'll subcontract this one out. I want you to send messages to all the major smuggling chiefs whose groups operate in this area. Brask, Card, Barta, any others we have on file. Use their private frequencies and encrypt codes. A little reminder of how much we know about each of them should help ensure their cooperation. Give them Skywalker's hyperspace vector and offer a bounty of 30,000 for his capture. Yes, sir. Pelion glanced back down the crew pit at the activity still going on around the tractor beam station. Sir, if you knew that Skywalker's escape was only temporary... The Empire is at war, Captain, the Grand Admiral said, his voice cold. We cannot afford the luxury of men whose minds are so limited they cannot adapt to unexpected situations. He looked significantly at Rook, then turned those glowing eyes back at Pelion. Carry out your orders, Captain. Skywalker will be ours, alive or otherwise. I hope you guys could hear me. It just occurred to me that the camera might be a little far off. I should have said far out. Although I think I'm getting better at like projecting my voice out, so yeah. Although the last time, like I checked the last video, it was pretty loud, so maybe it's better that I be somewhat of a distance away from it. Oh, also this is the cup I use for tea. I know, sacrilegious, right? I don't know why, I just felt like showing you guys that. Anywho, thank you guys for watching. I'm gonna work on editing some of the clips that Ryan and I put together. And hopefully, my buddy Robert and I will get to play some games also. Until next time, goodbye everybody. Almost saluted, I don't know why.